Have you ever had a room full of 200 people go completely silent, waiting to see if you'd let your own mother win? No? Then let me set the scene for you. It's a Saturday evening in September. String lights are strung between 100-year-old oak trees. A jazz trio is playing somewhere near the wine barrels. 200 guests in linen and silk are holding glasses of Pinot Noir made from grapes my grandfather planted with his own hands in 1974. And my mother is standing on a small wooden stage with a microphone in one hand and a stack of legal documents in the other, telling every important person in Sonoma County that I'm about to sign away the only thing my grandfather ever gave me. I said no. She told 200 people I was an ungraded, selfish daughter who didn't deserve the Hawthorne name. And then a man everyone in that vineyard believed was a criminal, a man my mother had spent 15 years telling the world was a thief who belonged in prison, walked through the vineyard gate with a folder under his arm and changed everything. That was the night I found out who my family actually was. But to understand how we got there, I need to take you back 4 years, to a Tuesday afternoon in a farmhouse kitchen that smelled like rosemary and diesel fuel, when an 81-year-old man handed me a set of keys and told me not to tell anyone yet. If stories about family, money, and people finally standing up for themselves are your thing, stick around. This one has more turns than the road up to the vineyard itself. And if it's the kind of story you like, hit subscribe before we start, because I've got more where this came from. Now, let's go back to where it began. My name is Nora Bennett, and for most of my life, I was the Hawthorne granddaughter nobody bothered introducing at parties. My mother, Diane, was born Diane Hawthorne, the only daughter of Walter Hawthorne, a man who'd bought 40 acres of scrubby hillside in Sonoma County in 1968 for almost nothing and spent the next 5 decades turning it into Hawthorne Estate Vineyards, 62 acres of Pinot Noir and Chardonnay, a tasting room built from reclaimed barnwood, and a reputation that took 3 generations to build and, as I'd later learn, about 3 hours to nearly destroy. My mother married my father, Gordon Bennett, a corporate tax attorney with a firm handshake and very little interest in dirt under his fingernails, and together they produced 2 daughters, my younger sister, Sabrina, and me. Sabrina was the daughter my mother understood. She was effortless in the way expensive things are effortless. The kind of pretty that photographed well, the kind of charming that filled a room without trying. She'd inherited our mother's instinct for reading a social situation and positioning herself exactly where the light was best. I was the daughter who spent summers in rubber boots following my grandfather through the rows, learning the difference between botrytis and powdery mildew before I learned algebra. While Sabrina did pageants and later sorority formals, I was in Walter Hawthorne's truck at 6 in the morning, checking bricks levels and listening to him complain about frost. "You've got dirt in your blood, Nora girl," he used to tell me, tapping the side of his weathered nose. "Your mother's got a business degree in her blood. Your sister's got Instagram in hers. You got dirt. Don't ever let anyone tell you that's the lesser thing." I loved my grandfather with the specific, uncomplicated love you have for the one adult in your childhood who never once made you feel like an inconvenience. Every Sunday, without fail, for 11 years, I drove up from Santa Rosa, where I ran a small regenerative farming consulting business called Roots and Ridge, to sit on his porch and drink the terrible coffee he refused to improve and talk about soil health and old friends and, eventually, about his health, which was declining in ways he tried very hard to hide from my mother. He never tried to hide it from me. It was a Tuesday in April, 4 years before the night at the vineyard, when he called me into the farmhouse kitchen, the original one, the small house at the northern edge of the property where he still lived, separate from the newer main house my mother had built closer to the tasting room, and set an old cigar box on the table between us. "I'm changing some things in the will," he said without any preamble, because Walter Hawthorne did not believe in preamble. "I want you to hear it from me before the lawyers make it official, so nobody can tell you I didn't know my own mind." Inside the cigar box was a set of keys on a leather fob shaped like a grape cluster, worn smooth from decades of handling. "The old cottage and the north parcel," he said. 11 acres, the original vines, everything I planted before your mother was even born." I remember setting down my coffee very carefully because my hands had started to shake. Grandpa, that's not a small gift. It's not a gift, he said. It's a decision. There's a difference. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, the same look he used to give me when I got a diagnosis wrong for a vine and needed correcting without feeling stupid. You're the only one who ever wanted to understand this place instead of just wanting to own it. Your mother sees 62 acres and a brand. Your sister sees a wedding venue. You see soil. Does Mom know? Something moved across his face. Brief, careful. Not yet, and I need you to understand something before she finds out. He reached over and closed my hand around the keys. There's a conservation easement I'm putting on that north parcel. It can never be developed. Not by you, not by anyone who comes after you. That land stays vines or it stays wild. That's non-negotiable, and it's already filed with the county. I didn't understand at the time why he felt the need to say that so firmly. I would understand within the year. Why me? I asked, echoing a question I imagine gets asked in every family where an inheritance surprises someone. Sabrina's your granddaughter, too. Sabrina asked me once what the land was worth, he said quietly. Not what it was worth. You've never once asked me that question in your whole life. He patted my hand. Your mother's not going to take this well, Nora girl. I need you to be ready for that. I had no idea that afternoon just how right he was, or how much worse things would get before they got better. Walter Hawthorne passed away 8 months later in December in his sleep in the small farmhouse he refused to leave despite my mother's repeated offers to move him into the main house, where it's more comfortable, Dad. The funeral was tasteful and enormous. 300 people, most of them there for the wine as much as the man, though I don't think that would have bothered him. He always said the good wine outlived good manners. The will was read 2 weeks later in a conference room at a law office in downtown Santa Rosa, and I watched my mother's face while the estate attorney, a soft-spoken man named Thomas Reyes, who had represented my grandfather for almost 30 years, explained the terms. The bulk of the vineyard, the brand, the tasting room, the 51 remaining acres, the equipment, the business itself, went to my mother as everyone had expected. That part was never in question. But the north parcel, 11 acres containing the original 1974 plantings, the small farmhouse, and a conservation easement that would prevent it from ever being sold for development, went to me. There must be some mistake, my mother said very calmly in the voice she used when she was deciding exactly how angry to allow herself to look in front of an attorney. That parcel includes the water rights for the Eastern Bloc. Dad wouldn't have separated those from the main operation without discussing it with me. He discussed it with me at length, Mrs. Bennet, Thomas said. The easement was his explicit and repeated instruction. He was quite firm about it. My mother did not raise her voice in that conference room. That wasn't her style. She simply turned to look at me with an expression I would spend the next 4 years trying to forget, and said, "We'll discuss this as a family." The family discussion happened 4 days later at the main house, and it had the exact atmosphere of a disciplinary hearing. My parents sat together on one side of the great room, my father with the stiff posture of a man who bills $300 an hour to look serious, Sabrina perched on the arm of an oversized chair, examining her manicure like the conversation bored her, though I noticed she never once looked away from it either. "Nora," my mother began, "I want you to understand that none of us are questioning your relationship with your grandfather." "That sounds exactly like you're about to question it." "What we're questioning," my father said in his measured attorney voice, "is whether an 81-year-old man in declining health was in a position to make sweeping decisions about water rights and easements that affect the entire operation's future value." "He was sharper than any of us the day he told me," I said. "He explained exactly why he was doing it." "And why was that?" Sabrina asked, not quite looking up from her nails. "Because I was the one who showed up," I said, "every Sunday for 11 years. My mother's jaw tightened in the particular way it did right before she said something she'd clearly rehearsed. The eastern water rights affect the entire estate's irrigation plan, Nora. Without them, our expansion into the eastern bloc is dead. Do you understand what that expansion means? It means the difference between staying a boutique operation and finally being able to compete with the estates in Napa. It means Sabrina and Grant's future, frankly, since Grant's family has already discussed folding some of their hospitality projects into the estate once he and your sister are married. And there it was, the first small thread of a much larger tapestry I wouldn't see fully for years. Sabrina had been dating Grant Ellison, heir to the Ellison Group, a hospitality and resort development company with properties from Cabo to the Hamptons, for about 8 months at that point. I didn't think much of it then. I would think about it a great deal later. The easement is permanent, I said. Grandpa filed it with the county before he told any of us. It's not something I can undo even if I wanted to. Then perhaps, my father said, you could simply decline the inheritance altogether and let the estate absorb the parcel back into the main operation. The easement would presumably need to be refiled under new ownership terms. I'm not declining it. The temperature of the room dropped the way it does right before a storm. I hope, my mother said quietly, that you understand what you're choosing, Nora, because family isn't just about what you're owed. It's about what you're willing to give up for the people who raised you. I left that house that evening with the specific, sinking understanding that I had just declared a war I didn't know the rules of. What followed over the next several months wasn't dramatic. It was quiet, and that was worse. I stopped being invited to the family group texts. I found out about Sabrina's engagement party. Grant proposed at a resort the Ellison Group owned in Big Sur, through a photo a cousin posted, not through my mother or sister. When I asked my mother about it directly over the phone, she said, "Oh, we just assumed with the Vineyard tension it might be awkward for you. We didn't want to put you in that position." The Vineyard tension became her explanation for everything, my absence from a christening. My name quietly dropped from the guest list of a fundraiser Hawthorne Estate co-sponsored every year. My mother began describing my inheritance to friends, I later learned, as a complicated situation Dad set up before he passed when his judgment wasn't what it used to be. Which was, I would eventually discover, a strange thing to say about a man whose estate attorney had 2 separate physicians confirm his full mental competency in writing. On the record, on the same day the will was signed, she was building something, I just didn't understand yet what it was, or how long she'd been building it. There was one strange thread I couldn't make sense of during those months. My grandfather had a younger brother-in-law, my mother's own brother, a man named Julian Hawthorne, whom I had never met. He'd been erased from every family conversation before I was even old enough to ask why. All I knew, from the fragments I'd picked up as a child, was that Uncle Julian had done something terrible 15 years earlier, something involving the Hawthorne Family Foundation, a small charitable trust my grandfather had set up to fund agricultural scholarships. The story, as my mother told it at family gatherings when his name accidentally came up, was always the same. Julian had embezzled almost $400,000 from the foundation. My grandfather had discovered it, and rather than press charges against his own son, he'd quietly forced Julian out of the family and out of the state. I had never once heard Julian's side of that story. I didn't know that year that I would eventually hear almost nothing else. The only clue that something didn't add up came from my grandfather himself, months before he died, on one of our Sunday afternoons. "Do you remember your Uncle Julian?" he asked me out of nowhere, staring out at the North Rose. "Barely. I know what Mom says happened." Something tightened around his eyes. "Your mother's version of a lot of things has gotten very tidy over the years," he said. "Tidier than the truth usually is." He didn't say anything else that day. I didn't push. I have regretted that more than almost anything else in this whole story. 3 years after my grandfather's death, on a Friday afternoon in late June, a cream envelope arrived at my studio in Santa Rosa, addressed in calligraphy so formal it took me a second look to recognize my own name. Sabrina and Grant's wedding invitation. September, the Vineyard, 300 guests, an engagement garden party the same weekend to be held, the invitation specified, at the historic Hawthorne Homestead grounds, which I realized, reading it twice, meant somewhere very close to my north parcel. My mother called that same evening, her voice warmer than it had been in 3 years. Nora, darling, I'm so glad you'll be there. This is going to be such a healing weekend for our family. I should have recognized healing weekend as a warning phrase. I didn't yet. I've actually been thinking, she continued, and here it came about the Eastern water rights situation. With Sabrina marrying into the Ellison family and their development experience, there's a real opportunity here, Nora. The engagement party would be the perfect moment to formally gift the water access easement back to the estate as a wedding present to your sister. Think of the symbolism. Think of how it would look, all of us finally united again. The land has a conservation easement, Mom. I can't develop it, and I'm not signing away water rights that keep my own vines alive. Nobody's asking you to give up the land, sweetheart. Just the water access for the Eastern Bloc, so the estate can finally move forward with the resort partnership Grant's family has proposed. There it was, not a family reconciliation, a business transaction wearing a bridesmaid dress. I'm not signing anything, I said. I would think very carefully before you make a scene at your sister's engagement party, my mother said, and her voice had gone cold in the way I remembered from the conference room. People will be watching, Nora. Important people. I'd hate for you to embarrass yourself in front of them. She hung up before I could answer. I sat with that phone call for a long time. Something about it didn't sit right. The specificity of resort partnership, the sudden urgency, the threat dressed as concern. I called an old college friend, Casey Nguyen, who now worked the local business desk at the regional paper, mostly to vent. Wait, Casey said when I mentioned the Ellison Group by name. The Ellison Group? I've actually been looking into them for an unrelated story. There's some noise about an offshore holding company connected to a couple of their smaller land deals. Nothing confirmed. Just noise. She paused. Why are they circling your grandfather's vineyard? I didn't have an answer yet, but the question stayed lodged in my chest like a splinter for the next 11 weeks. 1 week before the engagement party, I got a call from a number I didn't recognize. Nora Bennett? The voice was male, careful, a little rough at the edges. You don't know me. My name is Julian Hawthorne. I'm your uncle. I nearly dropped the phone. I know this is strange, he said quickly. And I know what you've probably been told about me. I need about 10 minutes, please. We met at a diner outside Santa Rosa 2 days later. Julian Hawthorne was in his late 50s, silver at the temples, with the kind of tired, watchful eyes of a man who'd spent a long time being careful about who he trusted. Your grandfather found me 18 months before he died, he said, stirring coffee he never drank. Hired a private investigator himself, if you can believe it. 80 years old and hunting down his own exiled son like a stubborn old bloodhound. A small, sad smile. He apologized to me, told me he'd finally found proof of what really happened with the foundation money 15 years ago. What really happened? I didn't steal that money, Nora. He said it simply, without theatrics, which somehow made it land harder than if he'd shouted it. Your mother did. She was managing the foundation's books at the time. I was just a signatory because Dad wanted family oversight. She moved the funds out through a vendor account that didn't exist, made it look like it traced back to my signature, and when Dad found the discrepancy, she told him it was me before I even knew there was a problem. He looked down at his coffee. Your grandfather believed her. Why wouldn't he? She was already handling half his business affairs by then, and I was the screw-up brother who'd bounced between 3 careers by 30. It fit the story everyone already believed about me. Why didn't he go to the police? Because she was his daughter, and I think some part of him always wondered if it really was me. Deep down, for years, he didn't press charges. He just quietly cut me out, gave me a settlement to disappear, and let the story calcify. I was too proud and too ashamed to fight it. I left the state. I didn't talk to any of them for almost 15 years. And then he found proof. Julian reached into a folder and slid a single page across the table. Not the whole file, just enough. A forensic accounting summary dated 18 months before my grandfather's death from a firm called Larchmont Forensic Associates. The conclusion, in plain language, the vendor account used to route the missing foundation funds had been opened using login credentials traceable to my mother's home computer at a time when Julian could be independently placed at a conference 3 states away. "He gave me a copy of everything," Julian said. "Told me he was going to fix it properly before he died. Bring me back into the will. Tell your mother he knew the truth. Force a real reckoning. He died 8 months before he got the chance." His jaw tightened. "I think that's actually why he moved the north parcel and the easement to you instead of leaving it in the general estate. He didn't trust what would happen to that land or to the truth if your mother had full control before he could set things right." I sat there in that diner booth, feeling the entire architecture of my family rearrange itself in real time. "Why are you telling me this now?" "Because Thomas Reyes called me 2 weeks ago," Julian said. "Your grandfather left something with him, a sealed instruction, to be opened only if your mother ever tried to force a transfer of the north parcel or its water rights under pressure or coercion. Thomas thinks that's exactly what's about to happen at this engagement party." He slid a business card across the table, Thomas Reyes' direct line already written on the back. "Your grandfather built a trap, Nora. He just needed someone to spring it. I think that's supposed to be you, and I think I'm supposed to be there when it happens." I called Thomas Reyes that same afternoon. He confirmed everything. The sealed instructions, the forensic report, a second, smaller detail Julian hadn't known about yet, which Thomas said he'd only reveal if and when it becomes necessary. "One more thing," Thomas said before we hung up. "Casey Nguyen's paper isn't the only one looking at the Ellison Group. There's a state real estate fraud unit that's had an open file on a similar water rights maneuver in Paso Robles for the last year. I'd be careful this weekend, Nora. I think more than one thing is about to come apart." The engagement party was, by any objective measure, beautiful. 200 guests moved between the tasting room and the lawn beneath the old oaks, the same trees my grandfather used to nap under during harvest breaks. String lights, a jazz trio, servers with trays of Hawthorne Estates Reserve Pinot, the same wine my grandfather had bottled for 40 years. My mother had spared no expense, and I understood, walking through that gate, that every dollar of it was a stage set for what she planned to do later that evening. I wore a simple dark green dress, nothing that could be called showing off, nothing that could be called hiding. I'd learned slowly that there was no outfit that would satisfy my mother's expectations, so I stopped trying. My father found me near the wine barrels within the first 10 minutes. "Nora," a small nod, "glad you made it?" "Dad." We had nothing else to say to each other. We hadn't, really, in years. Sabrina found me shortly after, radiant in a pale gold dress, her ring catching the light every time she moved her hand, which she did a lot. "You came," she said, hugging me with the same careful, performative warmth I remembered from every family event of the last 3 years. "Of course I came. You're my sister." Her smile shifted, just slightly. "Did Mom talk to you about the water rights paperwork?" "There's no paperwork, Sabrina. I'm not signing anything." "Nora, Grant's family is planning a whole eco-resort concept around the Eastern Bloc. It's a beautiful vision. Sustainable luxury, farm to table, the whole thing. This isn't about taking something from you. It's about building something for the family's future. It's about taking my water rights so a hospitality company can build a resort on land my grandfather specifically protected." Sabrina's jaw did the thing our mother's jaw does. "You've never once thought about anyone but yourself since Grandpa died," she said and walked away before I could respond. I found a quiet spot near the edge of the lawn, close enough to the old cottage on my parcel that I could see its dark windows in the distance, and that's where I ran into a woman in a cream linen suit who introduced herself as Priya Anand, a family friend of the Ellisons. "You're the granddaughter with the Vineyard cottage," she said in the tone of someone repeating gossip she'd been fed. "I heard there's some sentimental holdup on the water rights transfer," Such a shame to let old sentiment get in the way of a project like this. It's not sentiment, I said. It's a legally binding conservation easement. Priya's smile flickered, just slightly, the way people's smiles do when they realize they've been told something they weren't supposed to know yet. Well, she said, I'm sure it'll all work out tonight, and excused herself very quickly. Tonight. Not eventually, not someday. Tonight. I understood, standing there under the oak trees with a rapidly cooling glass of wine, that whatever my mother was planning, she had already told at least some of her guests to expect it. The toasts began around 8. My father gave a stiff, forgettable speech about legacy. Grant's father, a broad, tanned man named Richard Ellison, gave a longer speech about the beautiful union of two great California families that made my stomach turn slightly, given what I now knew about his son's company. Then my mother took the small stage set up near the tasting room, microphone in one hand, radiant in ivory silk. If I could have everyone's attention, she said, and the crowd quieted with the practiced obedience of people who'd been trained by decades of charity galas. I want to talk for just a moment about family, about the Hawthorne legacy, and what it means to protect it. I felt the first cold drop of dread slide down my spine. As many of you know, she continued, my father built this estate from nothing but stubbornness and 40 acres of scrub brush, and one of the things he always believed most deeply was that family takes care of family, that we make sacrifices for each other, especially in moments of joy like this one. She turned and found me in the crowd with the kind of practiced precision that told me she'd already scouted exactly where I was standing. Nora, sweetheart, would you come up here for a moment? 200 faces turned toward me. I want to be honest with you. For one full second, my body wanted to simply disappear into the ground, but I thought about my grandfather's hands closing around mine over that cigar box, and I thought, dirt in your blood, Nora girl, don't you dare let anyone make you feel small on this land. And I walked up. There she is, my mother said, sliding an arm around my shoulders. A grip, not an embrace. Everyone, my daughter Nora, has been the caretaker of a very special piece of our family's history. The original North Parcel and its water rights, left to her by my father. And tonight, in honor of Sabrina and Grant's engagement and the beautiful future they're building together, Nora has agreed to formally return the eastern water access to the estate as a gift to her sister. A folder appeared, seemingly from nowhere, already open, a stack of legal documents with my name pre-typed into the signature line. The crowd actually applauded. 200 people clapping for a theft they'd been told was a gift. Mom, I said, my voice steadier than I expected. I never agreed to that. Her smile didn't move, but her grip on my shoulder tightened until it hurt. Don't be shy, sweetheart. It's just a formality. It's not a formality. It's my water rights on land Grandpa specifically protected, and I'm not signing anything. The applause died into a silence so complete I could hear the string lights humming. Nora! My mother's voice dropped, but the microphone still carried every word. Let's not embarrass ourselves in front of our guests. I'm not the one who set up a public signing ceremony for a legal transfer nobody agreed to. Sabrina stepped up onto the edge of the stage, mascara already threatening, voice cracking with what I now recognize as genuine, if badly misplaced, hurt. Nora, how could you do this? Tonight, of all nights? I didn't do anything, Sabrina. I said no to something that was never mine to give away in the first place. After everything this family has done for you, my mother started. You erased me from every family event for 3 years, I said, and I felt something in my chest finally break open after 3 years of holding it shut. You told your friends Grandpa's judgment was failing when 2 doctors confirmed in writing that it wasn't. And you've spent 15 years telling everyone that your own brother stole from a children's charity when I have a forensic report sitting in an attorney's office that says otherwise. I hadn't meant to say that last part yet. It came out before I could stop it. My mother's face went the color of the tablecloth. You don't know what you're talking about, she said too quickly. I think I do. Her hand moved before I even registered it as a threat. The slap connected with my cheek hard enough that my head snapped sideways and my grandmother's small pearl earring, the one thing of hers I owned, given to me the year before she passed, flew off and skittered somewhere into the grass. 200 people went completely, utterly silent. I bent down. I found the earring. I put it back on with hands that were shaking, but only slightly, and I looked at my mother. "That's the last time," I said, that you ever touch me." I walked off that stage, through the tables, past the string lights and the frozen waiters and the jazz trio that had stopped mid-song, out toward the gravel drive, and I pulled out my phone and called the number Thomas Reyes had given me a week earlier. "It's Nora," I said. "Tell him it's time." I don't know exactly what I expected in the 20 minutes it took. I mostly stood near the old cottage on my own land, cheek still stinging, watching the party lights flicker in the distance, feeling strangely calm in a way I hadn't expected to feel. Headlights turned into the gravel drive. Thomas Reyes got out first in a gray suit, carrying a leather folder. Behind him, Julian Hawthorne stepped out of the car, and even in the dim light, I could see him take a breath before walking toward the party for the first time in 15 years. We walked back in together. The party had not recovered. Guests stood in uneasy clusters. Sabrina was crying, real tears now, while Grant hovered near her, looking distinctly more concerned with his own composure than hers. My mother stood near the stage, gesturing sharply at my father, who looked like a man watching a house he'd built slowly catch fire. Someone gasped first, then someone else. And then my mother turned and saw her own brother walking across her lawn, and every ounce of color left her face for the second time that night. "Julian," she said, and her voice cracked in a way I had genuinely never heard before. How are you?" "Hello, Diane," Julian said, his voice quiet but carrying across the suddenly silent lawn. "I wasn't invited. I hope Sabrina doesn't mind. I think it's time we talked about the foundation." "This is absurd," my mother said, rallying fast, turning to the crowd with the same performance instincts that had carried her through 30 years of Sonoma society. "Julian was removed from this family for embezzling from a children's charity. I don't know what he thinks he's doing here." Thomas Reyes stepped forward and opened his folder. "My name is Thomas Reyes," he said, his voice calm and carrying the particular authority of a man who has spent 30 years in courtrooms. "I represented Walter Hawthorne for 28 years, until his death. 18 months before he passed, Mr. Hawthorne commissioned an independent forensic accounting review of the Hawthorne Family Foundation's finances from the period in question 15 years ago." He held up a page. "That review concluded that the vendor account used to divert approximately $390,000 from the foundation was created and accessed using credentials traced to a home computer registered to Diane Bennett, not Julian Hawthorne." The silence that followed had a physical weight to it. "That's fabricated," my mother said, her voice rising. "Julian paid someone to fabricate this. You're senile if you believe—" "Mr. Hawthorne was examined by 2 independent physicians the same week he commissioned this report," Thomas said. "Both confirmed full mental competency, in writing, on the record. Those reports were filed with his estate attorney, myself, specifically to preempt exactly this kind of claim." He held up a second document. "This is a sealed letter Walter Hawthorne left with my office, to be opened only in the event that his daughter attempted to coerce the transfer of the North Parcel's water rights under public pressure. Given tonight's events, I'm authorized to read it." He unfolded the letter and in a quiet, level voice read my grandfather's own handwriting to 200 stunned guests. "If you're hearing this, Diane has done exactly what I was afraid she would do. I protected that water right because I always knew you'd try to trade it for something. A business deal, a wedding, your own comfort. I know what you did to your brother 15 years ago. I chose not to believe it for a long time because you're my daughter and because some part of me was a coward about what it would mean for our family if I said it out loud. I've spent the last year and a half making sure the truth exists somewhere permanent, whether or not I have the courage to say it to your face before I die. I clearly didn't. I'm sorry, Julian. For every year I let you carry a lie that was never yours. And Nora, the land is yours because you never once asked me what anything was worth. Don't let anyone convince you that makes you the fool in this family. It makes you the only one who understood what actually mattered. Nobody clapped this time. Nobody moved. There's one more matter, Thomas said, turning a page, and this was the part even I hadn't known was coming. Mr. Hawthorne's forensic team also flagged irregular fund transfers from Hawthorne Estate's business accounts over the past 2 years, routed through a hospitality consulting entity registered to the Ellison Group. I understand the State Real Estate Fraud Division has an open file on a related matter in Paso Robles. I'd encourage anyone here with fiduciary responsibility for tonight's proposed water rights transfer to consult independent counsel before signing anything. Richard Ellison's tan face went the color of old parchment. Grant took a very sudden, very visible step away from his own father. Chaos doesn't look the way movies make it look. It looks like 200 wealthy, well-dressed people trying very hard to appear composed while quietly moving toward their cars. My mother's voice rose into something close to a scream, directed at my father. Say something, Gordon! Do something! My father, who had spent 30 years being useful mainly for his silence, took a long breath and said, I didn't know about any of this, Diane. The foundation, the Ellison transfers, any of it. His voice was flat, hollowed out. I don't think I want to know any more either. Sabrina stood frozen near the stage, mascara streaked down both cheeks, staring at her mother like she'd never seen her before. Mom, she said in a small, broken voice. Is any of that true? My mother didn't answer her. She couldn't. She stood in the wreckage of the party she'd built as a stage for her own triumph, and for the first time in my adult life, I watched Diane Hawthorne Bennett have absolutely nothing to say. I found Julian near the gravel drive a few minutes later, staring back at the lit-up tasting room with an expression I couldn't quite name. Grief, maybe, or the strange emptiness of finally being believed 15 years too late. You okay? I asked. I don't know yet, he admitted. Ask me in a year. Grant caught up to us before we reached the cars, his composure completely gone, his voice pitched low and urgent. Nora, listen, whatever my father's done, that has nothing to do with me and Sabrina, and I really think if we could just sit down and discuss the water rights privately, there's probably still a way to structure something that works for... Grant, I said, your father's development company might be under state investigation, and you're standing here negotiating for water rights. I think you have bigger things to worry about tonight. He didn't have an answer for that. He went quiet, and then, wisely, he went back toward his rapidly departing father. The weeks that followed unfolded with the particular, unglamorous slowness of real consequences, which are rarely as fast or as clean as the moment of exposure itself. The California Attorney General's Real Estate Fraud Division, already investigating the Paso Robles matter Thomas had referenced, opened a formal inquiry into the Ellison Group's water rights consulting arrangements across 3 counties, Sonoma included. Richard Ellison stepped back from day-to-day operations within a month to focus on the investigation, according to a company statement that fooled absolutely no one. Grant and Sabrina's wedding was quietly postponed. Then, by October, quietly called off altogether. I heard secondhand that Sabrina had asked her mother directly whether she'd known about the water rights scheme being tied to Ellison's larger fraud, and that my mother's answer, evasive, defensive, ultimately unconvincing, was the thing that finally broke something in my sister that 3 years of my absence never had. The Hawthorne Family Foundation Board, once they saw the forensic report, quietly reissued a public statement clarifying that the 15-year-old embezzlement finding regarding Julian Hawthorne had been administratively reversed based on new evidence, which is corporate language for, we were wrong, and we're sorry, and we hope nobody sues us. My mother stepped down from the estate's day-to-day management in November, citing personal reasons. She retained ownership on paper, but Thomas Reyes, acting on a provision my grandfather had apparently anticipated needing, helped install an independent operations manager, a longtime Vineyard employee named Priscilla Ortiz, who had worked under my grandfather for 18 years, to actually run things. My father moved out in December. He didn't offer excuses this time, at least not to me. When he called, months later, all he said was, I chose not to ask questions for 35 years, Nora. I don't think I get to be surprised by what I find when I finally look. I didn't fully forgive him. I'm still working on it, but I stopped hanging up on him, which felt, at the time, like enough. The following spring, I planted new rootstock on 2 acres of the north parcel. Heritage varietals my grandfather had always talked about trying, but never gotten around to. An old Italian clone of Sangiovese he'd sourced cuttings for the year before he died and never had the chance to put in the ground. Julian came up most weekends to help. He turned out to have an unexpected talent for irrigation design. 15 years running a landscaping business in Oregon under a different name will apparently do that to a person. And between the two of us, Roots and Ridge quietly expanded from a solo consulting business into something closer to an actual small farming operation. With 2 employees and a growing client list of boutique vineyards up and down the coast who, ironically, were now very interested in working with the granddaughter who stood up to the Ellison scandal. Casey Nguyen's story on the water rights fraud ran in March, 6,000 words with my name mentioned exactly twice, which was exactly as much visibility as I wanted. Sabrina and I started talking again in April, slowly, carefully, over coffee rather than at family events without our mother present. She never fully separated from Grant, but she also never went through with the wedding, and I think some part of her is still working through what it means that she spent 2 years planning a life with a family whose foundation was built on something rotten. I don't think she's all the way there yet. I'm not rushing her. My mother and I speak occasionally now, mostly logistics, mostly short. Thomas Reyes tells me the fraud investigation into the Ellison consulting arrangements is still ongoing, and that my mother's own financial dealings with the foundation years ago remain, technically, an open question the statute of limitations may or may not still cover. I don't spend much time thinking about what happens with that. Some things really are out of your hands, and I found a strange peace in letting them stay there. I started therapy that same spring on Tuesday afternoons with a family therapist named Dr. Elaine Voss, who specializes, appropriately enough, in family businesses and inheritance conflict. It turns out there's an entire field of psychology dedicated to families exactly like mine. That was, weirdly, one of the most comforting things I learned all year. That this wasn't just my family being uniquely broken. It's a pattern old as land and money themselves. There's someone new in my life too, if you're wondering. A soil scientist named Marcus, who I met at an agricultural conference in Davis, who has no idea what the Ellison Group even is, and who fell asleep the one time I tried to explain the whole story to him, which I've decided to take as a compliment, rather than an insult. He likes me for the woman who can diagnose a struggling vine from 30 feet away, not for anything with the Hawthorne name attached to it. Last month, Julian and I sat on the old farmhouse porch, the same one where my grandfather handed me that cigar box 4 years ago, drinking coffee that was, admittedly, still terrible because some traditions are worth preserving badly. You ever think about what would have happened, Julian asked, if you just signed that paperwork at the party? Kept the peace? I thought about it for a long moment, looking out at the new rootstock just beginning to bud along the eastern rows. I think I'd have spent the rest of my life being smaller, I said, so other people could feel comfortable. I did that for 3 years already. I'm not going back. He nodded slowly. Your grandfather used to say something like that. Something about how he spent too many years keeping the peace with your mother, and it cost him 15 years of my life he never got back. He told me once that being kind and being silent aren't the same thing, I said. I don't think I understood what he meant until that night. Julian raised his coffee mug slightly like a toast. To dirt in the blood, he said, and to finally believing the people who have it. I laughed, and the sound carried out over the rows my grandfather planted half a century ago, still growing, still ours, exactly the way he'd meant them to be. If you're watching this and some part of your own family has ever asked you to shrink yourself, to sign away something that mattered, to stay quiet, to keep an image intact, I hope this story reminded you that you're allowed to say no. Being the person who finally tells the truth doesn't make you the difficult one. It makes you the one who finally stopped protecting a lie that was never yours to protect. Thank you for staying until the end. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. I read every one. And if you want more stories about family, inheritance, and the moment someone finally stands their ground, hit subscribe because there are more of these coming. Take care of yourselves, protect your peace. It was never selfish to